Tsavo Reserve, late morning. A small elephant calf moved alone through the red dust, her front leg dragging slightly behind her. There was no noise, no trumpeting, no call for help. Her steps were slow and deliberate, but the pattern was wrong. A heavy dip with each step, then a pause, then a sway. From the north edge of the reserve, near the older brush tracks, Ranger Elias had been walking a quiet perimeter check. He had not come looking for elephants. The early rains had moved most of the herds east, but the way the calf moved pulled him from his course. She was no more than 4 or 5 years old. Her skin was dry and pale where it should have held a sheen, and around her front left leg, just above the joint, the flesh was misshapen, swollen and cracked, the skin pulled tight like stretched bark. She did not limp in panic. She limped in silence with a steady rhythm that suggested she had learned there was no use in rushing. Elias stayed back, watching. She was not heading anywhere, just walking, then stopping, then walking again, making shallow prints across the dry earth. Her ears hung low, not to cool her body but because the energy was no longer there to lift them. Flies gathered around the wound, clinging to the exposed edges. She didn't flick them away. The air was still, warm, and thick with the smell of heated soil. Elias crouched by a nearby acacia and marked her position with a light scratch in the dirt beside his boot. Then he watched her pause again, shifting her weight off the injured leg, trunk brushing the ground loosely as if testing it for something she had already lost. She was too old to be newly born and too young to be alone. Somewhere, a herd had either left her or been unable to wait. Elias radioed back to the western post but spoke quietly, keeping his voice low. Injured calf, walking northwest, alone. No other tracks. I'm keeping distance. He didn't ask for backup yet. If she fled deeper, there would be no help in coming faster. He continued following, never closer than a stone's throw, watching how she moved, how she breathed, shallow and uneven. She stopped once to push at the dust with her trunk, but it wasn't a search for water or food. It looked more like confusion. After another stretch of slow movement, she reached a bend where the land dipped slightly toward a former watering trench. Long dry, cracked with old salt. There she stood still for longer than before. Her weight shifted once, then twice, and then she knelt suddenly, the injured leg folding beneath her with a motion too fast to be careful. Dust rose, light and brief, then settled. She did not try to rise. Her body swayed a little, not in sleep, but in the way animals sometimes hold themselves still to bear something they cannot fight. Elias approached 3 paces and stopped. She saw him. Her eyes shifted once and her ears twitched, but she didn't rise, didn't retreat, just sat there, with her trunk curled under slightly and the wounded leg tucked close to her side. From this distance, Elias could see the edge of metal, buried under the inflamed skin. A snare, thin and rusted. Old enough that it had settled in deep, too deep to fall off on its own. If she moved again, it would tear further. If she stayed down too long, infection would rise. Either way, it wouldn't wait much longer. "It's okay, girl," Elias said softly, almost a breath more than a sentence. The wind shifted slightly. The calf didn't react. The only sound was her breath, slow, tight, not yet panicked. Her trunk lifted once and lowered again. Elias lowered himself to the ground, just sitting, watching. There was no herd nearby. No call, no distant sound. Only a single life, paused in the dust, where survival now depended on timing. If she ran, she might bleed out. If they approached too soon, she might never trust again. But if they waited too long, the leg could be lost, and with it, everything else. The calf had not moved in over 20 minutes. Her trunk remained curled near her foot, and the injured leg lay stiff against the packed earth. A slow tremor passed through her flank every few minutes, like the body was resisting pain without the strength to show it. Elias had kept his distance, waiting with quiet stillness, watching the shape of her breath and the minute shifts in her posture. Now, with the wind steady and the sun past its peak, he gave the signal. Two other rangers emerged carefully from the low rise behind him. Neither spoke. Their steps were wide, measured, and slow, boots sinking lightly into the dry crust of earth. They carried only a field pack and a long canvas roll. No nets, no darts, nothing that would frighten her further. As they drew closer, the full shape of the injury came into view. A loop of twisted metal wire sat buried in the flesh of her left front leg, just below the knee. The skin around it had split in several places, revealing tissue red and raw beneath. Where the wire touched bone, there was blackness, not rot, not yet, but decay beginning. The smell was faint but distinct, a mix of blood and old iron. Flies hovered in thick spirals, undisturbed by her stillness. One of the rangers dropped to a crouch about 5 meters away. Elias stepped forward alone. He didn't speak again. He let the silence settle around them. When he reached the calf's side, he moved slowly, bending low without sudden motion, keeping himself beneath her eye line. She shifted slightly, not away but just enough to test the ground beneath her. He paused. She did not rise. Her breathing remained shallow but even. He reached out a hand and placed it near her trunk, palm open against the ground. Her eye flicked once toward him and then away. She did not move again. It was enough. The ranger behind him stepped in, unrolling the canvas beside the wound, revealing gauze, water packs, and a small cutting tool designed for precision, meant for snares like this one, meant for work done without sedation. There wasn't time to bring in full backup, and sedation risked collapse if the calf tried to flee too soon. The only option was speed wrapped in softness. Elias dipped a cloth into water and pressed it just below the wound, allowing the liquid to run downward in slow lines, loosening the dust and blood. The calf flinched once, a short motion that sent her back foot scraping across the earth, but then she went still again. The wire hadn't just cut. It had grown into the skin, nested in the muscle. The injury had aged. "This is old," Elias said softly, barely above a breath. "Weeks, maybe more." His partner nodded, already reaching for the blade. Each movement took time. They wet the area again and again. One held her trunk gently aside when it shifted across the wound. The blade worked beneath the edge of metal, slow and precise, never tearing. The calf gave one sound, low, rough and caught between air and pain, but did not rise. She did not strike. She simply endured. When the wire finally fell loose, it made no sound, just a soft shift in weight as it left her leg and landed in the dust. Blood followed, but not fast. Slow, thick, from deep inside. They pressed gauze to the wound and wrapped it tight, circling upward with soft tension. She blinked slowly, her eye wet from dust, not tears. Elias watched her posture. No tremor now, just stillness and the quiet presence of exhaustion. If she chose to rise too soon, the bleeding would reopen. If she panicked now, the effort could tear what they had just preserved. The risk was not in the wound alone. The risk was in the time. Every second of stillness borrowed. "She'll need rest," Elias said quietly, glancing toward the nearest trees. "And she's not safe lying here overnight." They all knew what waited in the dark. If she moved too soon, she might collapse. If she stayed too long, something else might find her. Still crouched beside her, Elias placed a hand gently on the ground again, close enough for her to see it, but not close enough to startle. Her trunk shifted once, brushing the dust where his fingers had been. Then she let it fall. The wind moved over them, warm and dry. For now, she stayed, but time was closing in again. The bleeding had slowed, but the bandage was already darkening beneath the folds. Elias stayed close, one hand resting on his knee, the other holding the last strip of gauze firm against the wound. The calf remained on her side, her leg stretched out awkwardly, and her flank moved in uneven rhythm with her breath. When the cloth touched too near the raw edge, she flinched again, a sharp, involuntary jerk that sent dust lifting beneath her shoulder. But she didn't rise. She didn't flee. Her eye turned toward him briefly, then away, as if she couldn't decide whether to trust what was happening or simply couldn't afford to resist any more. The air had thickened with heat. Shadows stretched longer across the dry basin. A single bird called overhead, but the rest of the land held still. Elias wet another cloth, letting the coolness soak through his fingers before reaching toward her again. He moved slowly, speaking just above the quiet. "You're almost there," he said, not for comfort, but to keep the silence from turning brittle. His voice stayed low and steady, like water smoothing rock. Her trunk shifted near his hand, brushing lightly through the dust, then stopped beside the soaked cloth. He paused, waited, then pressed the clean edge gently along her swollen leg. The other rangers kept their distance. There was nothing more to cut or clean. The decision now rested entirely on her. If she stood too quickly, the wound might reopen beneath its weight. If she panicked, they'd lose her entirely. Time was not generous here. Predators moved closer to water lines at dusk, and her scent, blood, sweat, open earth, would carry farther than her body could run. Elias leaned his weight into the press, not hard, just enough to keep the bandage tight. The calf let out a low breath, not a cry, not a warning, just the sound of tired lungs moving air. Her ears flicked once at a passing insect, then stilled. Slowly, carefully, Elias released the cloth, pulling his hand back inch by inch until it rested again beside his leg. She didn't follow the movement. She just lay there, watching the distance with one dark eye half open, half hidden beneath its lid. Minutes passed with no change. Then a small tremor moved through her spine. Not pain this time, but preparation. Her front foot shifted beneath her. Her back leg straightened slightly. Elias didn't move. He knew what was coming and knew better than to interfere. With a low grunt in her chest, the calf began to rise. It was not graceful. Her body rocked forward, caught itself, and rocked again. The bandaged leg folded last. For 1 second it buckled and she nearly tipped backward. But then she held. 4 feet planted, head low, ears dragging. Blood did not leak. The wrapping stayed tight. She stood breathing through her ribs, unmoving, her gaze fixed beyond the scrub. Elias stayed kneeling. He didn't speak again. She stepped once, a small, uneven motion, and paused. Then again. Each step was careful, not fearful. When she reached the edge of the clearing, she turned once toward him. Not a signal, not a farewell. Just a stillness that passed between them before she stepped into the brush and disappeared beyond the slope. He watched until the sound of her tread faded. Behind him, the land remained quiet. The risk had not vanished. Her leg was still torn. Her strength is still fragile. But she had stood. She had walked. And for now, that was enough. The wind shifted slightly as evening drew across the land, brushing the tops of the low scrub and bending the brittle grass in small waves. The calf stood at the edge of the clearing, her weight uncertain, her bandaged leg trembling now and then with the strain of holding upright for so long. The blood had stopped seeping, but the wrapping was tight, layered with dust. Elias stood 10 meters away, still and quiet, arms at his sides. He made no motion toward her. The others had moved off, circling to give her space, careful not to crowd the fragile stillness that held her there. She had not moved more than a few paces since rising. Her trunk hung slack, only occasionally brushing the air as if scenting something she did not expect to find. Her ears were limp with heat, and her eyes drifted slowly from Elias to the scrub behind him, then back to the distant tree line. There was no sound of other elephants, no low rumble across the valley, no movement from the east or west. The space around her was empty, and she knew it. At times, she shifted her stance as if preparing to step forward. Her good foot would rise, then hesitate, then drop back down in the same place. The injured leg held, barely. She could walk, but she didn't. Not away from him, not toward him. Just still. It wasn't confusion. It was the absence of direction. The kind of stillness that comes when all known paths have been lost. Elias crouched low in the grass, careful not to create a shape or sound that might startle her. He watched her posture, the small tremors that moved down her side, and the way her breathing had grown shorter as dusk approached. He had seen calves lose their way before, some taken by predators, others fading from exhaustion or infection. But this one had stood. She had held through the pain. That alone had bought her time. Still, time was no promise. Night would come fast. The path out would soon become shadowed and hard. If she stayed here, exposed, she would not last through the dark. But they couldn't make her move. Pushing her would only drive her deeper into panic. She had to choose. The light began to soften across the clearing, turning gold along the tops of the trees and dim along the earth. Elias reached for the small water bladder tied at his side and poured a thin stream onto the ground beside him. The water sank into the dust quickly, leaving only a dark patch in the dirt. The calf's ears twitched. She took a single step, one, then none. A pause. Then her head turned again toward the open valley, toward nothing. There was no signal from the wild, no guide to draw her forward. She stood on the edge of two choices, one where the memory of pain told her to retreat, and one where no memory at all waited to shape her path. Elias said nothing. He only stayed seated, his body at rest, giving her every moment he could without filling it. Then, quietly, she moved. It was not with confidence nor urgency. Just a slow, uneven walk into the tall grass. Her leg dragged slightly but held. Her steps were angled north, not toward the herd's last trace, not toward any waterhole, just away from where she had fallen. Elias did not follow. He stayed kneeling in the grass until her outline was swallowed by the slope. They didn't know where she would go. No collar marked her, and no trackers had been placed. It was her choice now. She was unclaimed, unnamed, and unbound. The last of the light caught her back before it faded. Then the land went quiet again, and nothing moved but the wind. By first light, the clearing was empty. The grass still bore her scent, faint and drying, and the soil held a single broad indentation where she had stood the night before. Elias arrived just after sunrise, stepping carefully along the low edge of the basin, scanning the ground for new signs. He found them just past the acacia line, a set of deep tracks angled northeast, dragging slightly at the left front foot. The bandage had either held or fallen away quietly. The blood trail had stopped. There were no signs of struggle, just footprints fading into the trees. She had not circled back. No droppings, no broken shrubs, no evidence of hesitation. Her path had been steady, deliberate, and silent. Whatever pulled her forward hadn't come from memory or familiarity. It had come from something older, a push to disappear, to survive without drawing the eyes of others. Elias followed the tracks until they reached a narrow crossing in the scrubland where footprints scatter easily, and then he stopped. Beyond that, the trees thickened. The signs dissolved into the wild. They didn't send a drone. She wasn't collared, and there had never been a name logged to her. The calf was never officially part of a monitored group. The snares caught more than just legs. They severed patterns, erased records, and pulled lives off grid. Her absence was not an emergency. It was the quiet vanishing that happened too often in wide places like these. By midday, the team had returned to routine. There were other patrols, other wounds, other lives half seen in the grass. But Elias checked that path again the next morning, and again the week after. For the first 2 months, he made a habit of scanning every report that came through from the east and south sectors: lone calves, limping movement, strange posture. None of them matched. Some were too young. Some are already dead. Some turned out to be different species entirely, spotted at bad angles or misreported by passing tourists. When the dry season returned, the memory of her narrowed into the details that remained. The way she had stood with her head low and her ribs rising in slow pairs. The soft crease above her eye when dust passed too close. The moment she stepped into the brush without turning again. There was no closure, but there wasn't a call for one either. In Tsavo, the line between saved and lost was never sharp. Some injuries heal into silence. Others fade without a trace, and most stories don't finish when humans are ready for them to. By the 4th month, Elias stopped checking the reports. He didn't forget, but he didn't expect anything more. If she had made it far enough, she would have returned to water. If the wound reopened, she wouldn't have lasted long. There were leopards in the western ridge, and scavengers tracked limping prey with patience that never tired. If she had found a herd, they wouldn't have been seen. If she had died, her body would have gone undisturbed. No carcass had surfaced, and no vultures had circled. It was as if she had simply walked past the edge of human reach, into the places that don't answer back. In time, the grass regrew over the trail. The basin dried, then bloomed again. Only the marks beneath a single old acacia reminded Elias where she had once knelt, and even those would vanish by the next rains. But on some evenings when the wind turned and the light broke low across the western trees, he found himself pausing longer than usual at the rise, listening, without reason, for the sound of a step that would never return. The air had begun to shift that morning, carrying the first dry signals of the long season ahead. Across the southern edge of the reserve, near the outermost fence post where brush gave way to brittle earth, the station remained still in its routines. Water levels logged, gate panels checked, ranger notes passed hand to hand. Elias moved slower now, his left knee stiff from a past fall, but his rounds were steady. He had grown quieter over the years, not out of grief, but repetition. The field gave no answers, only moments, and most of them passed without explanation. It was just before midday when the radio chirped from the East Watch. The message wasn't urgent. A shape had been seen, unmoving, too close to the southern barrier to be a migration path. No call for response, just a note of it. Elias stepped outside the outpost wall and followed the slope down to the boundary stretch. Dust lay thick across the flat, stirred only by wind. And then he saw her. She stood just beyond the fence, alone. A large cow, maybe in her early 20s, her skin marked with old scratches and fresh dust, her ears slightly tattered at the edge. But it was the limp that stopped him. The left front leg moved slower, just slightly offset from the others, like it bore an old memory beneath the muscle. She wasn't grazing, she wasn't walking. She simply stood, square, facing the post, her trunk low, unmoving. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. Distance filled the space between them, 30 meters at most. The elephant did not shift. Her weight was balanced, her body language was still. Not defensive, not drawn in, just present and watching. He glanced at the leg again, the way it touched down too carefully, the way the shoulder adjusted for it. He had seen that rhythm before, but only once, years ago, when the calf had pushed herself upright for the first time on the edge of the acacia basin. The memory struck not like emotion, but like alignment. The detail of motion, unchanged by time. The fence wasn't powered there. It had never needed to be. Nothing crossed that stretch without intention. The cow remained where she was. The wind pulled gently from the east, lifting strands of dry grass and curling them toward her feet. Her skin twitched once near the ribs, disturbing a fly or two, and then there was silence again. Elias stepped down from the path and moved closer to the edge. Not too close. Close enough to be seen clearly. His breath slowed, not from awe, but from care. the kind of care that doesn't expect welcome, only recognition. His boots stopped in the dust just shy of the low grass line. She blinked once. Her trunk shifted an inch upward, hovered, then lowered again. No sound passed between them. He saw no herd nearby, no young walking in her shadow, no flank brushing hers in silent contact. But this wasn't migration. This wasn't passing through. She was here, facing one direction only. If she had meant to move on, she would have. If she had come for water, she would have approached the basin, but she hadn't. The risk now wasn't for her survival. She had survived. That was clear. The leg bore the strain of healing, not of fresh damage, but the cost of those years, of walking alone, of relearning each movement with pain beneath it, lingered in the way she stood. No longer broken, but changed. Elias didn't move. The moment didn't ask for it. She had returned, not to be touched, not to be tagged or followed, just to stand at the line where something had once been given. A small silence. A choice left open. The wind passed through the fence posts and rattled a dry seed pod near the base. Her ears moved gently, and then she turned, not away but through the brush, slow and even. Her footsteps left only shallow prints behind. Elias watched until her outline broke against the tree line and disappeared behind the sunlit haze. The fence line held still again, quiet but no longer empty. The morning was already warm by the time Elias reached the edge of the south line. The grass had yellowed since the last rain, curling at the tips and breaking underfoot with a quiet crackle. His gait had changed over the years, not from injury, but wear. Steps that were once long and certain now carried a pause, a slight lean forward, a breath taken before descent. The path was the same. The light was the same. But his pace had softened, drawn out not by age alone, but by the knowing that everything now took longer, especially the moments that mattered. She was standing there again. Same posture, same distance. Her body faced the station wall, but her focus was elsewhere. Elias stopped at the same place he had stood the week before, near the corner post where the acacia cast its morning shadow. She hadn't moved when he arrived, and she didn't move now. Her ears swayed slightly in the heat, not in warning, just following the air. Her skin was layered with fine dust, and the shape of her shoulder was broader than he remembered. Heavier, stronger, but the limp remained. Not sharp, not painful anymore, just a shift in balance every few steps, the result of healing that never truly ended. He stepped forward slowly. No sound, no signal, just the rhythm of old boots in dry grass. She blinked once. Her trunk curled, then dropped. Still no movement away. No signs of retreat, not even stillness rooted in fear. Just presence. This was not a meeting. It was a return. Elias stopped 3 meters from the fence's edge. It was closer than he'd come before. The air between them carried nothing but warmth. He didn't speak immediately. The space asked for silence, for something less than language. His eyes moved to her face, then down to the leg. The scar was visible beneath a fold in the skin where tissue had grown around the damage. It was old and sealed, but it told a story. Then, softly, he spoke. "You remember?" It wasn't a question, just air wrapped around truth. At that, she shifted. Just a slight motion of her head, and her trunk dropped toward the ground, curling slowly until the tip hovered near the dust at his feet. Not quite touching, not reaching, but near enough that the space between was no longer empty. Elias didn't move. The moment was whole as it was. Years had passed. Herds had come and gone. But here stood a life once nearly lost, standing steady, bearing a wound that should have taken her. Not with pride, not with sentiment, just endurance. A quiet, unshakable fact. And then, from behind her shoulder, another shape emerged. Small, hesitant, moving with jerky precision, not yet fluid in the way adult elephants carried their weight. A calf, no older than 2, stepped lightly around her hind leg and peered at Elias with wide, unblinking eyes. The calf's ears were tight to its body. Its steps were cautious and uneven. It didn't approach, but it didn't hide. It stayed just behind her front leg, partly shielded, partly brave. Elias's throat tightened, but his body remained still. He lowered his gaze slightly, then back to the mother. She didn't move again. The calf shifted its trunk toward a nearby stone, nudged it, then lost interest. The mother let it explore but did not break her line of sight. 7 years ago, a calf with no herd had collapsed in the dust, her leg torn open by metal, her eyes dulled by exhaustion. Now she stood with a calf of her own, alive not because she was rescued, but because she chose to rise, walk, disappear, and return. The decision to live had been hers. What had grown from that choice stood beside her now. Elias said nothing more. There was nothing left to give. Not here, not now. He stepped back slowly, just one pace, then another. Her trunk lifted slightly, paused, then dropped again. The calf followed her lead. 1 step, 2. Then they turned, not in urgency, not in farewell, just as a pair ready to leave. Grass bent beneath their feet, and dust rose faintly in their path. As they moved toward the slope beyond the fence line, the calf brushed her side once, a soft contact made without thought. Elias watched until they reached the far end of the clearing and passed beyond view. The breeze moved again, rustling the grass in long, slow waves. The sun was high now, softening the edges of every shape it touched. And in the stillness that remained, a quiet thread of something unspoken settled in the dust. The morning had stretched long without sound. No footsteps from the east, no wind strong enough to move the brittle grass. Elias stood where the grass met the dust, just beyond the southern fence line, the same patch of earth he had returned to each time she appeared. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The space between them had settled into something weightless. Not trust, not reunion. Just the quiet presence of a past acknowledged. The elephant stood tall and still across from him, her calf nestled against her flank, small and unsteady but calm. It was the kind of calm that came not from understanding, but from watching, from learning the shape of stillness in a mother who had once survived alone. No one called from the station. No other rangers approached. The others had learned in time that these moments were not interruptions in the rhythm of the field, but part of it, rare and fragile and better left untouched. There was no urgency. The leg that had once buckled under a snare now bore weight, uneven but reliable. The bandage that had long ago fallen away was no longer part of her story. What remained was healed, scarred but whole. The calf shifted its weight, leaning slightly into her side, pressing the soft line of its trunk along her upper leg. She didn't respond at first, but then, slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes didn't close. Her ears didn't lift. She simply looked once toward Elias, then past him, to the stretch of land behind, and without a call, without a sound, she began to walk. It was not dramatic. It was not slow for effect. Just the pace of something finished, something that had been held, understood, and now released. Her body moved with the same weight it had carried before, only now alongside a smaller one. The calf hesitated once, then followed, walking with small, uneven steps in the spaces her feet left behind. Dust rose gently where they passed, catching in the low breeze that had begun to stir the grass again. Elias remained standing. His arms hung loosely at his sides. He didn't raise a hand and didn't call after them. There was no farewell to offer. Some animals returned, most didn't, and even fewer gave a reason. This one had come back only long enough to stand. To show the outcome of a choice made years earlier. A choice to rise, to walk, to vanish, and now to leave again. The pair reached the rise at the far edge of the clearing. Beyond it, the land dipped back into acacia shade and brush, broken only by termite mounds and the faint lines of water trails hardened by sun. She did not pause before the crest. She didn't turn. The calf glanced back once, a small flick of movement before hurrying to keep pace. Elias exhaled softly, the breath catching slightly from the dry air. He looked once more toward the horizon, where the last hint of her back moved through the trees. Then she was gone. The grass settled again. A distant weaver bird called from somewhere near the gate-post. Light shifted over the clearing, turning the color of dry straw and low sun. Some returns don't ask for recognition, and some connections once formed don't require words, or proof, or permanence. They live in the way a scar holds shape long after it's stopped hurting. In the way one life carries another's absence like a quiet weight. Elias turned from the fence line and walked back toward the outpost, boots soft against the path. Behind him, the breeze moved through the brush, and the grass bent once, then stilled.